Hi everyone, this is Ben Collins from Sage Intact, and just want to start by saying thanks for joining us today. We've got a pretty short but also pretty topical section which will focus on how emerging fintech providers should be thinking behind the scenes about what their ideal finance tech stack should look like. Now this is an interesting topic to talk about with a tech audience, but it's also something that can often be overlooked by companies in the fintech space. You're often so focused on growing the business, but you also need to make sure you have the systems in place that can scale as you grow. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share some of the best practices and insights that we've gleaned from working with clients within the fintech space to help construct a flexible but powerful set of back-end financial systems. In working with these clients, we've seen some patterns emerge over time, so I'd just like to share some of these patterns which will hopefully help you frame some of these issues and assist in navigating this process. In terms of my professional background, I've straddled the finance and tech worlds for my entire career. First, I started as an investment banker working with small to mid-market tech companies to help raise capital or with M&A transactions. And after about a decade of working on strategic deals, I transitioned to operational roles within tech companies, namely with SS&C Intralinks, which is a SaaS platform used by finance professionals for secure collaboration, where I led the product marketing team for their largest business segment, and now with Sage Intact, where I lead the industry marketing team that's focused on serving the financial services vertical. For those that aren't familiar with Sage Intact, we're a cloud-based provider of financial management solutions. We work with companies across the financial services landscape to help them create a more streamlined approach to managing their internal accounting and other core financial processes. All right, so as we kick off today, and just to set the stage, there are really two things that I'd like to center the discussion around today. The first is, how do you create a frictionless customer experience on the billing and cash flow side? And then the second piece is around, how do you get the reporting on your own side to help guide and inform your own decision-making as an organization, as having that actionable data really is a critical component of success. All right, now that we've set the stage a little bit, there are really four key takeaways that I hope to leave you with after this presentation today. We'll start with, how do you accomplish the two things that I just talked about? How do you create a frictionless customer experience on the billing side, as well as a dynamic reporting engine for your own needs? Then how do you tie that into creating a checklist that's appropriate for your company's finance team to follow and utilize when constructing and thinking through the technology stack for your own organization? I'll also touch on what sort of reporting you need in order to create, in order to support the growth of your business and help guide which operational levers you should be pulling. And lastly, what exactly are the different components that comprise the finance team's tech stack? So let's talk a little bit about some of the core elements that you need to think through when assessing the technology needs of the financial operations team within your own organization. Within finance and accounting, you're often thinking about, how do we make our operations more efficient, or how do I invoice more efficiently and accurately? But you also need to consider the customer side of the equation. So being able to respond to an evolving set of customer needs also should be an area of focus. And that's without sacrificing any of the core components or requirements of those that sit in the finance function within your team. I've been part of organizations where our entire go-to-market strategy was actually based on what our back-end systems could support. Trying to shoehorn contracts into this type of rigid system was a total nightmare. So really understanding your client's needs is paramount, and it's also nice to have flexible systems that can accommodate change. You also need to be in a position where you can respond to your product team as they develop new products and ways to monetize certain features. Otherwise, you might get stuck where a contract comes through, you're not quite sure how to invoice it. You need to be flexible because accommodating customers' business needs and different accounting requirements can be a pretty tough line to walk at times. Now, looking at the second bullet point here, as we look at the accounting foundation, it's important to have the basics in order before you start to get overly intricate and then work out from there. We definitely advocate a crawl, walk, run approach when it comes to creating a tech stack. So doing it gradually can actually have a lot of benefits so long as the foundational elements are strong and in place. For most companies, it really starts with the core accounting system, and then you work out from there. So looking at revenue recognition next, then invoicing processes, and then potentially sales tax and tax implications. Now that order can be different for different companies, but usually that's the progression that we've seen folks follow when looking to build out their tech suite. Next, let's think about aligning your use case to the market. There's the expense side of finance, but in a lot of respects, accounts payable isn't really that different from company to company. But what about the billing use case? How are you trying to monetize that customer relationship and stay ahead of competitors? So this can often be a point of contention between sales and finance. So it's really about how much flexibility do you put into the billing system. And as I mentioned before, flexibility is good, but too much flexibility can also introduce its own set of problems. Also, having good partners across the organization that understand finance requirements and why they have those requirements, and they're willing to understand what those requirements are is really optimal. But you're always going to have exceptions to the rules, especially if you're an early stage company and really just trying to get deals done. So I would suggest looking to solve the majority of the use cases you have, so sort of that 80-20 approach. Try to put some controls around what can be done, get finance connected with other internal groups like sales, product, et cetera. In the billing use case scenario, having finance looped in early ensures that contracts going out to prospects and customers are accounting friendly and back office friendly. So that alignment with counterparts across the organization really helps build out that framework and establish the right level of controls. Now, the point about exceptions, bringing the finance team and potentially senior management, I guess, as well, to their knees, that's depicted here in this slide, might be a little bit of hyperbole, but really that misalignment on the capabilities of the tech stack can throw a pretty significant monkey wrench into the equation if it's not thought through properly. Now, the last component to have in place is understanding how technical debt or tech debt can accumulate. And it's like that credit card with the absurd APR that maybe you signed up for while you're still at university. So the more complexity you build into the contracting model at the early stages, it makes things even more complicated when the volume starts picking up. So when you go from billing 100 to 500 to 1,000 customers, you need an integrated set of systems where data flows really aren't constricted in any significant way, which is why some clients work with their CRM administrator, because that CRM system and data creates the quote to cash instance. So just be mindful also of hard coding, the number of workarounds your team is employing as well. Just keep a close eye on those exceptions, because they're going to always be there. That's just the nature of business. But is that number stable? Is that percent of exceptions on the rise? So really, you want to that technical debt can accumulate just like that credit card with the high APR. So just being mindful if that number of exceptions is on a constant upward trajectory, probably time to take a step back and get ahead of things before debt becomes a real burden on your organization. In our experience working with a lot of companies in the fintech space, we've started to see a couple of patterns emerge over time. Maybe some of you have some experience with this. And when you start building and the companies in that growth stage, early stages, the finance team, they're generally overworked, their hair is on fire, they're trying to juggle a million things. The inclination for a lot of finance team within these fintech firms is to default to what they know. And that's technology. So they start implementing and putting in place tech solutions. And I use that word solution pretty loosely here, but they put them in on a piecemeal basis in order to put out these fires. But what it often does is create a big, really complex layer of data. So with this huge and disparate data set, more time is spent on attempting integrations, and then more time creating manual workarounds. More time you have to do on that and spend on that, the more time you're delaying the close. Then you get multiple systems of record, and then staff meetings sometimes devolve into people arguing about whose data is correct. Simply isn't productive or a fun environment to be in. So it really comes back to that notion of, in order to be effective, you need to think about people, process, and technology. But there is that fourth horse in the race, and that's data that I just talked about. And to really set your business up for success, you need to have a pragmatic approach to your tech investments. Which brings us to this checklist that you can reference when your finance team starts to think about building out their tech stack. Now, this isn't a granular level, every single line item that you should be thinking about when it comes to your technology solutions that you're implementing, really more of a holistic view as to the key themes and points that you should be contemplating. So as we discussed initially, you just need to get basic accounting and finance-related information, just getting your arms around your financials at the end of every month. Then as you become a little bit more sophisticated, you need to start really looking at your business use cases, especially around billing, revenue recognition, making sure that you've got all of those things documented. Maybe that's the current state of what you're doing today, and knowing that you need to get to a future state, trying to look at the systems that will help drive that evolution. And as we touched on previously, that data layer is really interesting and sometimes pretty complicated. So it's really understanding what is the company's success being measured on, what do you report on, and then how do you get your system set up to be able to report on that data automatically without those manual workarounds and spending hours and hours in Excel manipulating reports manually. So again, every company is a little different here. They handle it a bit differently, but you don't want the finance team to be mired in spreadsheets day in, day out, just manipulating this data. So you need to think about the different systems that create that data and where it's captured, and does it need to be combined with other data sets, and are those systems compatible? As we've talked about, there are always going to be exceptions, so how do you handle those exceptions? What sort of governance do you have around that? Can you be flexible? How flexible do you want to be? Can you reevaluate your process and your tools to help support getting those exceptions done in the most effective way possible? And then lastly, and probably the least fun piece of this whole process, but one of the most important, is around compliance. So making sure that you have the ability to report on the business internally, to your board, to your leaders, to potentially regulators, and also to investors in a way that makes sense to each of those different groups. So how can you get the data in a way that will get you through that audit or through that oversight or review, and any of the other kinds of tax or compliance related items that you'll need to handle? In talking with a lot of our clients, what we've seen is that there's a lot of variety in terms of the billing and billing use cases that they employ, which can be influenced by a number of different factors. So what is the target market? Is it small, medium business, or is it enterprise? What is the term of most of the contracts that they're utilizing? Are they monthly? Are they annual? Is it multi-year contracts? Are they transactional or subscription type contracts? Now, I'm not going to read out each one of those that are depicted here, but these are the types of questions that you need very clear answers to when thinking about your technology needs. Unfortunately, the piece that's underlying all of these models and some of the questions that you can see here is that too often finance leaders aren't brought into conversations when the company is developing or launching new products. So someone in finance might not even learn about a new feature, a new product, until it's actually in a contract and they need to act on it quickly. So you really need to dig into what is it that you're really selling. For instance, can you really support both transactional and subscription contracts, and understand your target market? From there, you can put the proper policies in place and develop your use cases around how you might structure a contract, how you support that with the billing piece, and how you can support it also with revenue recognition. With fintech companies, there's a lot of complexities, and there can be a lot of variation in what I just talked about. You could have subscription, you could be transaction focused, you could have usage, consumption, hardware in your revenue streams. So that really goes back to that question of data. So really, where is that data coming from in these different use cases? Is it data from Stripe? Is it from your SaaS application that's housing the data? And then, how is that data, how is that being fed into your accounting system so that it's invoiced properly? So I'm probably making these questions sound a little bit more daunting and probably more ominous than they really are. These can be solved for. It's just these are the types of tricky questions and things that you need to think through, ideally in advance, and try and sort through these and figure out, what are the answers to them, because ultimately those are the types of answers that are going to drive what sort of technology solutions that your business requires. One of the key goals or outcomes of the carefully constructed tech stack that we've been talking about here today is really centered around alleviating some of the reporting struggles and difficulties that a lot of fintech's firm seem to deal with. So what are the top reports that we see our clients most interested in? So So some of the common ones that we've heard about, now these are the monthly ones that help our clients manage their own businesses, are captured here. And those are around billings and bookings, ARR bookings, obviously a very important metric, as well as churn, retention rates. And also if you're in a services business or if you have a professional services team, that professional services backlog and utilization ratios are key numbers for your services department to keep track of. But it's all about moving on and transitioning from that data deluge from your general ledger accounts to something that can actually help you manage your business, right? So it's also important to mention the process behind how you get this data. Many systems providers are going to tell you that you can get this information, but it comes down to the old adage of bad data in, bad data out. So when you're looking at new technology, it's important to reiterate, know your business, document your use cases, as we've talked a lot about here today, conduct a formal evaluation, and also know your people. So it's critical to understand current workflows and involving the actual end users of this technology during the evaluation process. And what we found is that this really helps aid and expedite the implementation and also just the alignment of the software and ultimately its adoption. As you think about all of the different discrete processes that involve the finance function, it's best to try and think about them holistically so you can get this vision and this picture of your entire tech stack. Now this slide here shows the major components of what your technology infrastructure should support. Now it captures what you're doing on the revenue side with all of the different billing scenarios depicted. Then it ties into your cash flow. There's also the expense side of things, your sales tax, your revenue recognition, and then a lot of the core accounting on the back end with the close and the compliance aspects. So these are really the major aspects to consider in terms of the functionality and systems that constitute your tech stack. Just going back to the reporting piece for 1 minute here, I wanted to share a visual of what you can get out of all of the infrastructure that we've talked about and the tech stack when you nail it up front. So you can get a nice clean outcome like this. Now this dashboard is one from our own systems and it's clearly a gratuitous product placement, but regardless of the application, have a very clear vision in mind of what that after scenario looks like and what that data you're trying to get out of your system, what it's going to look like in that after state. And have that in mind as you're selecting your technology partners. All right, so I'd just like to recap some of the key things that hopefully you'll take away from this session here today. The first is around thinking through how your tech stack accounts for both your finance team's needs as well as market demands and trying to walk that fine line and engage with both customers and your team to ensure that their inputs are considered. Also thinking through what's that checklist. So we presented some holistic ideas today. Obviously you want to get more granular and get buy-in from the actual users of that end software as you think through those requirements. Also think about the reporting because that's really what one of the key outcomes that the systems ultimately need to provide. And once you've gone through those, then you can lay out what those systems should be that you're investing in. And one CFO recently told us that similar to how the development team has their own product roadmap within his organization, the finance team also has their own roadmap. So if you think about these internal pain points around finance, map out where those challenges exist and work with the key stakeholders across your organization to figure out if there's a tech solution that could streamline things. These days, finance leaders really serve as the stewards of data. And now they may not own the entire data set, but they definitely need to know where everything is coming from. In the past, everything we talked about here today was typically owned by the IT function. And the finance team, and really all internal functions, were essentially a customer of what was being delivered. Sure, you could weigh in on requirements, but more and more, we now see that you as the functional groups can own that process. So that wraps up the presentation, but if you have any questions about anything that I talked about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Also, if you want to learn more about what we do here at Sage Intacct, we've got a bunch of different ways to learn more about us, which can all be found on our website. We also conduct regular coffee break product demonstrations. Now, these are short product demos which highlight some of the key features we offer, and I would highly encourage that you check those out. Thanks again for spending a few minutes with us today. I hope everyone has a great week. Bye, everyone.